ahead and open your Bible now to Acts chapter 12. Acts chapter 12. I appreciate last week Brother Joey Farrell presenting the good message he did about the gospel of Christ, as well as preaching a good lesson. As Joey's really grown a lot in the Lord, and I really appreciate him for doing what he has done. Let's begin with chapter 12, verse 1. Now, about that time, Herod the king stretched out his hand to harass some from the church. When you read the word Herod, what does that mean? Who do you think of? Okay. Most of us tend to think about Herod the Great, the one who was there at Christ's birth. But we don't realize that Herod is a family name rather than being one particular person. You have Herod the Great, who was the king when Jesus was born. You have, after his death, Herod Archelaus, and who was reigning. And then you have the Herod that asked for the head of John the Baptist. That was Herod Antipas. And now you have this Herod, and his name is, anybody? Agrippa. But it's not just Herod Agrippa. It's Herod Agrippa the first. I'm glad somebody knows the Herod. I would tell you that you look at this family tree, but there's sometimes the family tree doesn't fork, which lets you know there's a lot of intermarriage. They're a family of a lot of different difficulties. But this is Herod Agrippa the first. And it says he stretched out his hand to harass. Now, what did that mean? Persecute, cause trouble for. You have to go back and remember, right after the church started, was there a strong reaction to the church? Yeah, there was. You remember in Acts chapter 4, 3 and 4, the arrest of the apostles, Acts 5, verse 29, they were challenged not to preach anymore, and they said, we must obey God rather than men. By the time you get to Acts 7, you have Stephen preaching. What happens to Stephen? He's stoned. Acts chapter 8, we learn that there was a persecution that arose against the church in Jerusalem, and they were scattered except the apostles. All the church started scattering into all the world because of that persecution that was brought upon them. Well, now you get to Acts chapter 12, and you have Agrippa the first, and he is himself attempting to harass some of the church. Now, the question that might arise is, why is he doing this? Let's look at verse 2. Then he killed James, the brother of John, with the sword, verse 3, and because he saw that it pleased the Jews. Herod Agrippa was raised in Rome. He was definitely not a man of Jewish culture and background, but he did something that ingratiated himself to them. And that was, when he took the throne, he read the scriptures according to Deuteronomy chapter 17, verses 14 through 20. You know, kings, when they assume what they're supposed to do, they're supposed to read the law. He did that. And you know what that did to most of the Jews? They said, hey, this guy respects the word. What would happen if we elected a man as president and he said, okay, for my first State of the Union, I want to read the scriptures before Congress? That would just shock most of us. And how would most of us feel who are Bible-believing, respectable Christians if we heard a president do that? We felt like we might have some hope. We also would say, maybe this guy is the guy that the Lord has sent. And so the Jewish people accepted him, and what he did, he attempted, in most of his actions, was to respect the Jewish holidays as well. Whenever those Jewish feasts came, he conducted himself with respect for those Jewish holidays. And so because of that, he found himself being well loved by the Jews. And I will tell you, if you want to read Josephus, he has a real good discussion about how Agrippa got to where he was and about the way the Jewish people loved him and appreciated him. Now, let's go back and notice he began to harass the church, but in verse 2, he says he killed James, the brother of John. James, the brother of John, is also referred to as James, the son of Zebedee. You know, James and John are two brothers. You remember their occupation were fishermen. They, along with Peter and Andrew, were partners in the fishing business. But he killed him with a sword. That means that now you have one of the apostles being martyred. And that's when it starts really getting real, when the apostles are starting to be killed, isn't it? I mean, this shows that he raised it to a different level. You know, prior to this, the apostles were threatened. But you got to remember, what kind of official is Agrippa? Is he Jewish or is he Roman? He's Roman, which means that when he says somebody dies, what happens? They die. You see, the Jewish people, they kill people, but they weren't supposed to. But in this case, we have a public, government-sanctioned, if you will, execution of one of the apostles. And it says in verse 3, he saw that it pleased the Jews, so then he proceeded further to seize Peter also. Guess what he's planning to do with Peter? He's planning on killing Peter too. If you wanted to choose of the apostles someone to make an example of, which apostles would you want to go after first? Peter, James, and John. He got James. Now he has arrested Peter, and so he's seized him. But now there's a reason why he doesn't execute him immediately, because it says it was during the days of unleavened bread. You know what that unleavened bread feast is associated with? The Passover. You see, they would, beginning 14 Nisan, was when they started the days of unleavened bread. And then during that period of time, they were not supposed to have any leaven in their house whatsoever. It was a time of the children of Israel reflecting their departure from the Egyptian bondage. And so it's during those days. And the reason why he doesn't do this is because he's showing respect for that Jewish holiday. Do you remember when Jesus was put on the cross? What did they want to do about taking his body down? Didn't want it to be hanging there over the holiday. You can imagine the body being hung out during the sunshine and the heat. It would have decomposed. And so they took the body of Jesus down before the Passover began. And so now you have the harassment of the church. You have here the Jews being pleased with this. Well, let's go on to verse 4. And when he had arrested him, he put him in prison and delivered him to 4 squads of soldiers to keep him, intending to bring him before the people after Passover. Now, it says he'd arrested him. We know he's in prison. Now he's in prison. But it says he delivered him to 4 squads of soldiers. A squad was 4. So how many soldiers are keeping him? 16 soldiers. Is he taking Peter's imprisonment seriously? Why that many people? Don't want somebody breaking him out. In fact, we're going to notice how securely Peter was going to be kept here in the verses that follow. But at this point, it's important to notice that there's 16 people that are guarding him. Well, now beginning with verse 5 and going through verse 9, we're going to notice what is occurring while Peter is being kept in prison. Peter, therefore, was kept in prison, but constant prayer was offered to God for him by the church. Notice while Peter's in prison, what's the church doing? They're praying. Constant prayer. I've got to wonder if the church has just been assembled. Of course, we're going to see in a minute where they're at. But there are people here praying for Peter on a regular, constant basis. Would you want to lose a man like Peter as an apostle and all that he's done? No, you wouldn't want to do that. Well, James was killed before the days of the Passover. Peter was arrested. I don't know, perhaps, we're not told, and all this will be speculation. Was it the fact that James was more accessible to get him, and then once you get him, you kill him, and then it just so happens he is able to arrest Peter during the days of the unleavened bread. But we know he's waiting till after the Passover to bring him past. Why do you suppose the Jews hate Peter so much? I think there's two reasons. I think first of all is because he's preaching Jesus. But second of all is they have to have heard what happened with the conversion of Cornelius. Because you remember we studied Acts 11, and when Peter came back to Jerusalem and he reported that what God had been done, the circumcision contended with him. They were upset until he explained to them what all had taken place. Well, for the Jews to hear that Gentiles are going to become acceptable to God is just, blasphemy. And so they're ready for Peter to die and all of this. But it says constant prayer was offered to him by the church. Is it appropriate? Is it valuable? Does it need to be done that the church pray individually for specific people in specific circumstances? Yes. We sometimes ask people to pray for us individually. Is that good? Well, yes. But is it important for the church sometimes to pause everything else and stop and pray for someone in the church? Yes, it is. We used to call our Wednesday night our prayer meeting service. Maybe we ought to put a little more emphasis on praying for people individually. Maybe make a list of people whose situations are dire and maybe people who are going into the mission field, people who are suffering health issues, people who are being persecuted for various reasons, and to pray for them. Well, I think that's important to notice that the church is doing this here. Now, beginning with verse 6, and when Herod was about to bring him out, that night, Peter was sleeping, bound with two chains between two soldiers, and guards before the door were keeping the prison. Now, how close is it getting for Peter's execution? We're just looking at hours, because it says the time had come and that Peter was in the prison, but he's sleeping. What does that tell you about his comfort level as far as where he's going to go? He wasn't worried. I think sometimes some of you may have had some serious surgery, some of you may not so serious, but I can tell you that every time before I have something done that's the night before, how well do you sleep? Not very well. You're usually anxious. How's this going to turn out? Am I going to wake up from that anesthesia? Am I going to be able? There's so much, but now Peter is sleeping. And you got to imagine the impact that made on those soldiers. But the second thing we learn, that he's sleeping bound with two chains. Did they intend for Peter to escape? No, he's been bound with two chains. Number two, he's sleeping between two soldiers. Not only are they not going to let him get by when he's got chains on, but he's got two soldiers able to overpower him if they need to be, if he were to happen to get out of his chains. But number 3, there are guards before the door keeping the prison. He's in chains, 2 soldiers, and now there are gates, bars between him and getting out. The likelihood this is in the Fortress Antonio. There is an area on the northwest corner of the Temple Mount called the Fortress of Antonio. And with it, the Roman soldiers could get up in it and look over the Temple Mount area and see everything that was going on. But there was also a place there for people to be kept. And so it's very likely that's where he is being kept here. Verse 7 says, "Now behold, an angel of the Lord stood by him, and a light shone in the prison. And he struck Peter on the side and raised him up, saying, 'Arise quickly,' and his chains fell off his hands." Now, I want you to notice a few details that are a part of this. All of a sudden, an angel of the Lord appears. How did he get there? He just appears there. But then the second thing, a light shone in the prison. If it's at night, what would the prison have been like? Very dark. If you had maybe a torch or maybe even an oil lamp, small, how much light would you have had? Not much. But all of a sudden, a light shines here in this. Second thing, he struck Peter on the side. Why do you have to do that? Wake him up. He's asleep. Peter, hit him on the side. Wake up. Arise quickly. You've got to get out of here. Now I don't know if when you read through this, if you pause a moment and think about the light shining, being struck on the side, if the telephone rings at 2 o'clock in the morning, how do most of us react? Are you going to answer that? Most of us are a little bit addled, because we've been deep in sleep. And sometimes what if fire was in your house? Somebody, hurry up, get up, there's fire. We went on vacation a little over a week ago, and at 2 o'clock in the morning in the hotel, all of a sudden you hear this wow, wow, wow sound, and all of a sudden there's a voice comes over the intercom and says, "Please leave what you have and exit the building immediately." And 2 o'clock in the morning, everybody's going out of their rooms, going down the stairwells to get outside. Come to find out somebody was smoking in the hallway. And, I wanted to pelt the person after it was over with, but all of a sudden you're addled. Get up. Arise quickly. Peter, it's time to get out of here. And the chains fall off his hands. Well, how did that happen? Miraculous. Verse 8. Then the angel said to him, "Gird yourself and tie on your sandals." And so he did. And he said to him, "Put on your garment and follow me." What's verse 8 saying? Get dressed. Put your clothes on, tie your shoes on. I can tell you at 2 o'clock in the morning, first thing I'm thinking is, I want something that's not going to be embarrassing to walk outside the door. And where's your shoes? Peter, it's time to get up. Put your clothes on. And he's able to because the chains have fallen off of him. So do that and follow me. Verse 9. So he went out and followed him, and did not know that what was done by the angel was real, but thought he was seeing a vision. Why would Peter think this could perhaps be a vision? He's had visions before. How realistic can a vision be? Well, let me ask, how realistic can your dreams be? Very realistic. I mean, you can think that this is something that is actually happening. How many of you wives have dreamed something about your husbands and woke up and being angry at them? They didn't do anything, but you woke up and you're mad at them because of something you dreamed. And that vice versa as well. He thought he was seeing a vision. And perhaps he thought, well, the Lord's letting me see that maybe I will be released. Well, verse 10. When they were past the first and the second guard post, they came to the iron gate that leads to the city, which opened to them of its own accord. And they went out and went down one street, and immediately the angel departed from him. Now, we learn a little bit more about the prison now. He's been in an inner prison with 2 chains and 2 guards, and now the angel's leading him out, and it says they go past the first and the second guard post. What does that tell you? Way deep down in the prison. There's guards who are assigned to watch him. Now, of those 16, my assumption is that you would have them 2 by 2, and you would have them perhaps 2 during the day, 2 during the night. He's got 16 soldiers guarding him, so they could each have, their own period of time. And so there's soldiers here that are watching for him. But then it says they come to the iron gate. Now, what would be implied by an iron gate? Strength? Heavy? In fact, if you look at some of the details with regards to this, that usually the gates of these would be iron, the outer gate would be, and sometimes these outer gates would require several men and sometimes even a lever to open them. We're not talking about a door on hydraulic openers and closers. We're talking about a real serious ancient gate. And he gets to the gate, and what does it do? It opens of its own. That's in and of itself got to be a remarkable feat just to see that. And it says, and they went down one street, and immediately the angel departed from him. Here's Peter now. He's out on the street, and what do you suppose Peter's thinking? What next? Where am I going to go? And to whom should I go? And what does the Lord expect me to do? Well, let's go to verse 11. And when Peter had come to himself, he said, now I know for certain the Lord has sent his angel and has delivered me from the hand of Herod and from the expectation of the Jewish people. Peter now, it says, comes to himself. He is fully alert. He's fully aware. He knows what's going on. He says, I know for certain that he sent his angel. This is something that God did. It's not me. It's something that God has done. He delivered me from the hand of Herod and the expectation of the Jewish people. Herod wanted to kill me to make them happy and what they were looking for, and God has delivered me from that. Peter is now fully confident of what the Lord has to offer him. Verse 12. So when he had considered this, he came to the house of Mary, the mother of John, whose surname was Mark, where many were gathered together praying. And the verse 12 has a lot in it. It said, when he had considered this, okay, I know what the Lord has done. I know where he's got me planned, what he's got planned for me. So he goes to a specific house. Why do you suppose he goes to Mary's house of all the houses? That's where the church was. They were gathered together praying. Where did the church often meet? In the homes of various people. Were there some people who were noted for having churches in their houses? Yes. Why do you suppose certain houses were where people gathered for worship to God? Size? Hospitality of the house owner? Location? Well, it appears he's gone down one street, and so he's not going to have to go evidently too far. And he comes to the house of Mary, but this is not just any Mary. There's a lot of Marys in the Bible. There's Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of Jesus. This is Mary, the mother of John, whose surname is Mark. So what does that tell you about John Mark? Anything? Oh yeah, he'd be a Christian. Christian household. Would John have gotten a good training at being faithful to the Lord? If you host the church meeting in your house at a time when the apostles are being arrested and killed, what are you saying about your devotion? You're dedicated. Because where are they likely to go to kill people if they know that the church is meeting there? To their house. So it tells you, number one, Mary is a devoted person. We're going to learn more about her son, John Mark. If you want to turn to Colossians chapter 4, verse 10, we learn that John Mark is a cousin of Barnabas, which also may tell you something about their financial status. Barnabas had a piece of property. What did he do with it? Sold it and gave it. So if he is a man of considerable means, would it be likely that perhaps his family would also have been people of means? Very likely. So you have this. So again, emphasizing that John Mark's also going to go with Paul and Barnabas on that first missionary journey. So that's also going to tell you a little bit about whose house this is. And the church is gathered there praying. That's what I'm assuming. Of course, Jerusalem wasn't a huge city back then as far as size. Okay, let's go to verse 13. And as Peter knocked at the door of the gate, a girl named Rhoda came to answer. When she recognized Peter's voice because of her gladness, she did not open the gate, but ran in and announced that Peter stood before the gate. Now, I want you to think about that. Here's Peter. What time of the day or night is it? It's got to be the middle of the night, because you remember the light shone in the prison. Okay, it's Peter outside. Rhoda comes to the door. Oh, that's Peter's voice. Most of us would do what? Open the door and let him in. But it says she recognized his voice, but because of her gladness, she did not open the gate. I can just think of a child. Maybe, grandma and grandpa's coming from afar off, and they've come to town, and you go knock at the door, and the little child, the grandchild, goes to the door, and all of a sudden here's grandma and grandpa. Oh, it's grandma and grandpa. Well, did you let them in? No. Do you see the excitement, the gladness that she has that it's Peter? And she's announced that Peter stood before the gate. Well, how are they going to respond? You are beside yourself. Yet she kept insisting that it was so. So they said, it is his angel. Now, here's a real important observation. How confident is the church in the prayers that they've been praying? Because when she said Peter's outside, I'm thinking, here's Peter standing outside. Are they not ever going to open the door? Because she's in, that's Peter. No, you're beside yourself. You just, and then they decide it must be his angel. Now that deserves a little bit of thought. Their mind is that the Jewish mind was that when a person died, their spirits hung around. And do you remember when Samuel had died and Saul wanted to find out what the Lord was wanting him to do. What does he do? He goes to a witch at Endor and wants her to summon Samuel for Saul. And does Samuel respond? Yes. So in their mind is Peter has already been killed, and perhaps it's his angel. Maybe he's haunting the place. I mean, that's not really the right terminology to use, haunting, but that's their concept. Maybe it is his angel that is there knocking at the door, because it surely can't be Peter. He's between two soldiers, held by two chains, deep into prison. There's no way that he can be let loose. Verse 16. Now Peter continued knocking, and when they opened the door and saw him, they were astonished. He keeps knocking. That reminds me of a few years ago. I was asked to go to the jail here and to visit one of our members' sons who was in jail. And back then, they used to carry the prisoner and me back into what was called the chapel. And they would say, when you're through, call the front desk and we'll come get you. So I went and stayed about 30 minutes, and I called the front desk. I said, I'm ready to leave, and you can carry him back to his cell. And they said, okay, we'll come get you in a little bit. Well, I waited about another 30 minutes. They didn't come. So I called the phone again and picked up the phone and said, I'm here, I'm ready to go. I called earlier, and they said, okay. About another 15 minutes went by. I called again. Another 15 minutes, I called again. I've been back there about 2 to 3 hours. And then finally I said, can I speak with Jackie? I said, I've been back here in the chapel for several hours now, and I'm ready to go. Peter's continuing knocking. He's ready for them to let him in. And they open the door, and what are they now? Astonished. They didn't believe that Peter was there, and when then Peter is there, what are they doing? Wow, it's Peter. How in the world did he get out? So going all the way through verse 16, you have them responding here. Well, look, let's begin with verse 17. But motioning to them with his hand to keep silent, he declared to them how the Lord had brought him out of the prison. And he said, go tell these things to James and to the brethren. And he departed and went to another place. Now, there's a couple things here. Number one, he has to motion to be quiet. Why do you suppose he has to tell them that? I think everybody's like, Peter, what happened? All right, everybody just be quiet. Let me just tell it one time. Everybody listen to what I'm going to tell you. How the Lord brought him out. But then he says, go tell these things to James. How do I know that this is not James, the brother of John? He's dead. So which James is this? Well, it's possible it could be James, the son of Alphaeus. But that's not very likely. Most likely the Lord's brother, because of what we read in the book of Galatians about how important James, and James will also be very important when we get to Acts 15 as well. So go to James and to the brethren. So are there people meeting in other houses, perhaps praying at the same time that the people are meeting in Mary's house praying? Yes, there are. So we know that there are other parts of the congregation that are meeting in various places. And so it says he departed and went to another place. That tells me that there's likely several places where those who are praying for Peter are gathered together. Why does he want James and the brethren to know? Their prayers were answered? Build their confidence. God answers prayer. And there's a future here for the church. Every time it seems like the devil's gaining the upper hand, what does God do? Knocks him back down to let him know that God is going to survive all of this. His people are going to survive. Well, it's possible. Again, that's speculation. We're not certain, but we do know there are people meeting in more than one place here. Okay, now, and the reason why I can tell you, I know it was the middle of the night, it said, as soon as it was day, there was no small stir among the soldiers about what had become of Peter. Now, I want you to imagine you're one of the two soldiers who is guarding Peter, who is chained in that inner court. And it's daytime, and all of a sudden, you look around, and there's your other guard with you, but where's Peter? And the chains are laying there. It says there was no small stir. Why would that be? They're in really deep trouble because their life is on the line. You lose somebody that's your prisoner. Do you remember in Acts 16 when the prison shakes and Paul and Silas are in prison there, and when the jailer's about ready to kill himself, remember what Paul said? Do yourself no harm. We're all here. He was ready to just take his life. He'd rather go ahead and die at his own hand than to die at the hands of the persecutors. So there's no small stir. I'm assuming, is he in there with you? And then the soldiers who are guarding the first guard station, the second guard station, are, did he make it to you? No, he didn't get by me. Where's he at? Well, do you imagine they start searching behind every cove and every corner in that prison? Verse 19, but when Herod had searched for him and not found him, he examined the guards and commanded they should be put to death. And he went down from Judea to Caesarea and stayed there. He's looking for Peter, and he can't find Peter, so who's he going to hold accountable? Those people who had charged guarding him. Those 16 men, every one of them lost their life. And so... To Herod, he had to believe that somehow they didn't do their job. He may have looked and said, well, they fell asleep, and he just walked out of the prison. Took a bribe or something such as that. Well, it says now in verse 19 that Herod went down from Judea to Caesarea. This is Caesarea by the sea. And the reason why he goes there is because that's where the Roman headquarters is at. It's like sometimes we look at Jerusalem, we think, well, that's the capital, that's the sea. Oh, no, that's not where the Roman capital was at. The Roman capital was at Caesarea, that huge complex that had been built by Herod the Great. There's a beautiful palace there. In fact, I was there just a few weeks ago, and they had right out in front of where Herod's palace was, they have a freshwater swimming pool that goes right up to the waters of the Mediterranean. But it's a freshwater swimming pool. Has a floor of a beautiful mosaic in it. I mean, we're not talking about just an ugly palace. We're talking about a beautiful place. And so he goes from Judea to Caesarea, and he stays there because that's his place where he normally lives. He just comes to Judea for the purpose of this feast of the Passover. And it's sort of like when we read about Pilate in Matthew chapter 26, we have to realize that's not where he lives, but that's where he's come for the feast. Well, Lord willing, next week we'll pick up with verse 20.